Welcome to Karma Chronicles. Please like the video and subscribe. Let's begin. The rain had been coming down all day, the kind that never seemed to stop. I stared out the window, watching the droplets race each other down the glass. My mismatched socks were sticking to the floor, and my coffee had long since cooled into a sad, lukewarm puddle in my mug. It was one of those days where everything felt off, like the world was moving slower than I was, and I was just trying to keep up. I wasn't in the mood for anything, least of all the phone call that rang through the silence of my apartment. The screen flashed with an unknown number, and my instinct was to let it go to voicemail. But something made me hesitate. Maybe it was the curiosity that I usually tried to avoid. Or maybe I was just desperate for a distraction. I swiped the screen and lifted the phone to my ear, half expecting it to be some automated sales pitch. Hello? Hi, is this Lucy Whitman? The voice on the other end was calm, professional, but somehow unfamiliar. I sat up straighter, my mind racing. Yes, this is Lucy. Who's calling? This is Margaret Ellis. I'm an attorney, and I'm calling on behalf of your late grandmother, Estelle Whitman. I blinked, not sure if I had heard her right. My grandmother? Estelle. She'd passed a few years ago, but 6 months ago, I hadn't heard anything about it. Late? What do you mean? I asked. My voice quieter now, the weight of her words sinking in. I'm very sorry to inform you that your grandmother passed away 6 months ago, Margaret continued. I've been handling her estate, and I'm calling to discuss some matters regarding a will she left behind for you. I didn't know what to say. A will? A matter? My grandmother had always been a bit of a mystery, but I couldn't remember her leaving me anything, let alone something worth an attorney getting involved. What exactly are you calling about? I asked, my voice shaky now. Well, there's a journal your grandmother kept, and there are also a few legal matters that require your attention. I'd like to meet with you to go over them. The journal. I'd never heard of it. Meet? I repeated. When? How about later this afternoon? Would that work for you? She asked, as if it was a simple thing, setting up a meeting. I glanced at the clock, still early in the day, but I couldn't shake the sense of urgency in her voice. Something about it felt important. Maybe I should be more careful, but all I could think was that I wanted to know what was happening. Yeah, I said, before I could talk myself out of it. I can do later this afternoon. Great. I'll send over the details. And Lucy, please bring identification. It's important. I will, I promised, even though I had no idea why it felt like this whole thing was starting to unravel. She hung up without another word, leaving me standing in my kitchen with nothing but the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of rain tapping on the windows. My mind raced, but it didn't make sense. My grandmother? A journal? I set the phone down slowly, staring at the counter as the weight of it all sank in. A mysterious journal? What had she been keeping from me? And why now? By the time I walked into Margaret Ellis's office later that afternoon, I felt like a completely different person. I had been trying to calm my racing thoughts, but nothing worked. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets wet and slick, and as I stepped inside the building, a deep sense of unease settled in my chest. The lobby of the law firm was exactly what you'd expect: sleek, polished, and professional. Everything from the chairs to the minimalist art on the walls screamed money and success. I felt out of place here, like I didn't belong. I wasn't used to this world. I'd been working a simple desk job for a small marketing company, living in an apartment I could barely afford. Nothing in my life had prepared me for whatever this meeting was about to reveal. A receptionist greeted me with a smile and directed me to a room at the end of the hall. I swallowed hard as I approached the door, took a deep breath, and knocked. Come in, came the calm voice from inside. I turned the handle and entered, my nerves twisting in tight knots. The office was larger than I expected, with a large oak desk neatly arranged in the middle of the room. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping view of the city below, but I couldn't focus on that now. My eyes were drawn to the woman sitting behind the desk. Margaret Ellis was in her late 50s, with gray hair neatly pulled into a bun, and she wore a dark blue blazer that looked like it cost more than my entire wardrobe. She had a kind face, but her eyes were sharp, assessing. Lucy Whitman, she asked as I stepped inside. She rose from behind the desk and extended her hand, her grip firm but warm. Yes, that's me, I said, shaking her hand, my voice betraying a little of the nervousness I felt. Please, have a seat, she said, motioning to a chair in front of the desk. I sat down, my fingers nervously tapping against my knees. The silence stretched between us for a moment before Margaret opened a folder in front of her. She glanced at the papers inside, then back at me. "So, I assume you're wondering why I called you here," she began, her tone professional, yet not unkind. "Your grandmother, Estelle, left some very specific instructions for you regarding her estate. This includes a journal she kept for many years, as well as some other materials that I believe will require your attention." I nodded, trying to process the fact that a journal had somehow been part of this. The last time I'd seen Estelle was years ago, and back then she was mostly focused on her own life. Her gardens, her books, her quiet home on the outskirts of town. I couldn't imagine her keeping anything so significant. Margaret slid a leather-bound journal across the desk toward me. It was worn, its edges frayed from years of handling, but the weight of it felt heavy, almost like it carried 1,000 secrets. "Your grandmother was very private, Lucy," Margaret continued. "This journal contains a lot about her life, but also about your family, your mother, you." I stared at the journal, my hand hovering over it, but unsure if I was ready to lift the cover. There was something unsettling about the way Margaret spoke, like there was more she wasn't saying, something important. I had no idea she kept something like this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Margaret nodded, her expression unreadable. "I'm not surprised. Estelle was careful with her thoughts. But she wanted you to have this. She left it in her will, along with some other instructions that, frankly, I think you should hear directly from her." Her words sent a shiver down my spine. I wasn't sure what she meant by "hear directly from her," but it felt like a turning point in the conversation. Whatever this was, it wasn't just about a journal. It was about something much bigger. I glanced down at the journal in front of me, unsure how to approach it. Was this some sort of final confession? A hidden truth? Margaret seemed to sense my hesitation and offered a small, reassuring smile. "I know this is a lot to process, but your grandmother's will is clear. She wanted you to have the journal, and she also wanted you to take a look at something else." She reached into the folder again and pulled out a folded piece of paper, sliding it across the desk. My breath caught in my throat when I saw what it was, an old hospital birth record. I stared at the paper, my mind racing. It was a birth record, but not for me, for my mother. "That's my mother's birth record," I said, my voice trembling slightly. Margaret nodded. "Yes, and there's a note in your grandmother's will regarding it. She wanted you to know the truth about your mother's death, about what really happened." The words hit me like a brick. I had always been told that my mother abandoned me, that she left without a trace when I was just a baby. The story had never made sense to me, but it was the story I had always been given. And now, here I was, holding something that threatened to shatter everything I'd ever known about my past. I looked back at Margaret, my mind spinning. "What do you mean? What really happened?" Margaret's expression softened. "I can't tell you everything right now, Lucy, but I think this journal and the information it contains will help you understand. It's the key to understanding why Estelle did what she did, why she kept these truths from you." I reached for the journal, my hands shaking as I picked it up. This was the moment I realized. Everything was about to change. But what I would find in those pages, I wasn't sure if I was ready to know. I felt the weight of the leather journal in my hands, its corners softened from years of use. I turned it over, running my fingers along the worn edges, almost as if trying to will myself into understanding what lay within. I could already feel that whatever secrets were inside, they would change everything. Margaret was quiet as I opened it, her eyes watching me closely, waiting for my reaction. I skimmed the first few pages, the handwriting neat but faintly tremulous, like someone pouring their heart into every word. The journal entries were dated and varied. Some were filled with mundane details. Estelle's thoughts on the weather, her garden, the cats she'd always adored. But as I turned the pages, the tone began to shift. I began reading more personal accounts, stories about her life, about family events I'd never known about, and there it was, a mention of my mother, Rebecca. I paused. The words felt like a punch to the gut. Rebecca didn't leave her. They lied. I read the line again, blinking as the words swam in front of my eyes. My mother didn't abandon me. She didn't leave. That had always been the story. My mother had left when I was just a baby. Everyone had told me that. It was the version of the truth that I had carried with me for years. But this was different. I looked up at Margaret, my hands shaking, the journal still open on my lap. What does this mean? What was she talking about? I couldn't find the words. My mother's death had always been shrouded in mystery, but I had never questioned the version I was told. Margaret sat across from me, her expression unreadable. Your grandmother knew the truth, Lucy. She always knew. But she kept it from you, from everyone. I felt like the ground had shifted beneath me. I had been lied to. My whole life had been built on a lie, and it was all beginning to unravel. My mother hadn't abandoned me. The truth was something far worse. I flipped through more pages, my mind racing. Estelle had written about her attempts to reach out to me, to stay in contact when I was a child. But my stepmother Carol had blocked her at every turn. The entries described how Carol had moved away, cutting off all communication, making sure Estelle couldn't keep her promise to remain in my life. One entry stood out to me in particular. It was about a Christmas when I was 7 years old. Lucy never got the dollhouse. I wanted to give it to her, but Carol made sure it didn't happen. She said it was unnecessary. She said it was too much. Lucy heard about it from one of the other children. It broke my heart to see her so disappointed. I'll never forgive Carol for that. I felt my chest tighten. A dollhouse. I had always wondered why I never received the one I had wanted so badly. The one I had heard about from a little girl at school. I remembered that day, the sadness I felt when I realized I'd never have one. But I had never known why. And now, I knew. Carol had made sure I didn't get it. She had actively worked to take away from me the things that could have made my childhood a little brighter. I couldn't breathe. I slammed the journal shut, feeling a strange mix of anger, confusion, and pain welling up inside of me. I stared at the closed book for a moment, trying to collect myself. I don't understand, I said. Looking up at Margaret, my voice strained. Why would Carol do that? Why didn't anyone tell me the truth? Margaret sighed, sitting back in her chair. Your stepmother wanted control, Lucy. She wanted to rewrite the story of your life, and she didn't want anyone getting in the way. Not Estelle, and certainly not you. And as for your father, she paused, letting the words hang in the air. What about my father? I asked, my voice suddenly tight. Margaret hesitated. I'm afraid your father was never the man you thought he was. Estelle knew that too. She knew about your mother's death, the real reason she died, but your father, he never told you the truth either. I felt the blood drain from my face. What do you mean? What really happened? Margaret reached for the birth record that had been tucked neatly beside the journal and slid it across the desk toward me. Your mother, Rebecca, died during childbirth. She didn't abandon you. She was taken from you. And your father, he didn't protect her. He didn't protect you. I picked up the birth record, my hands trembling. The details were there, Rebecca's name, the date, and the cause. Complications during childbirth. She hadn't left me. She had died giving birth to me. I felt like I was suffocating. All these years, I had believed my mother had abandoned me. And now I was learning she had never even had the chance to choose that for herself. Why didn't anyone tell me? I whispered, the weight of it all crashing down on me. Because your father couldn't bear the truth, Margaret replied softly. And Carol made sure the story was twisted in such a way that no one would ever question it. She manipulated the narrative, controlled your life, and made sure you believed the lie. I closed my eyes, feeling the anger boil up inside of me, the betrayal, the lies, the years I had wasted, holding on to a story that wasn't even true. I had been robbed of the truth, robbed of my own history. I slammed the journal down on the desk, my voice coming out louder than I intended. How could they do this? How could they let me grow up believing that? How could they all just let me believe my mother didn't care? Margaret sat quietly, watching me, her eyes sympathetic but firm. You're not the only one who was lied to, Lucy. Your grandmother kept the truth hidden because she wanted to protect you. But now it's time to face it. The truth is painful, but it's the only way forward. I nodded, swallowing hard. The truth was painful, but it was also the only way to heal. Do you want to know the rest? Margaret asked quietly. I nodded without hesitation. I didn't know how, but I needed to know. I needed to understand the full story, the one that had been hidden from me for so long. Margaret leaned forward, her voice softer now. There's more, Lucy. Estelle left you something else. She wanted you to have everything. But she also wanted you to understand that your life, your future, is yours to claim now. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I'm ready. Margaret nodded, her face unreadable. Then let's finish this. I picked up the journal again, flipping through the pages, ready to learn everything that had been hidden from me for so long. Everything that would shape the person I was about to become. The truth was finally here, and I was ready to face it. Margaret handed me a small yellowed envelope, the kind that had been sealed for far too long. The paper was delicate, fragile, the ink slightly faded at the edges, and the way it felt in my hands was almost like holding a piece of history. The envelope had a strange weight to it, more than just paper, as if it held something significant that I wasn't quite ready for. Open it, Margaret said softly, watching me carefully as I held it in my hands. Your grandmother left you something important. I swallowed hard, my heart racing. The journal had already turned my world upside down. Now, this envelope was the next step. I carefully peeled back the flap, pulling out a small tarnished key and a small scrap of paper. The key was old, not like anything I had ever seen before. It was rusty, its edges worn smooth from years of use, but it felt oddly familiar, like I had seen it before in a dream or memory I couldn't quite place. The paper had a note written on it in Estelle's familiar, elegant handwriting. Front door, use the side entry lock sticks. I frowned, looking from the key to Margaret, my mind racing. What is this? What does this mean? Margaret's eyes were steady, her voice low. This is the key to Estelle's house. She wanted you to have it. There's something inside that you need to see. She made sure you were the one to find it. I looked down at the key again, feeling a strange mix of apprehension and curiosity. I had never been to Estelle's house. She had lived on the outskirts of town, in a modest little cottage that always felt a little distant from the rest of our family. But I had heard stories about it, how she had kept to herself, how she had made sure to preserve every little piece of her life. Now it seemed like that house was going to hold all the answers I had been searching for. Margaret leaned forward slightly. Estelle didn't just leave you a journal and some legal matters. She left you the house, Lucy, everything in it. She wanted you to have it all. I froze, the words barely sinking in. The house? Everything? I had always assumed the house would go to my father, or maybe to Carol, but Estelle had left it to me. I didn't know what to feel, shock, disbelief, gratitude. You're serious? I finally asked, my voice barely a whisper. She left me her house? Why? Margaret nodded, her gaze unwavering. Yes, it's all yours now. But Estelle had her reasons for leaving it to you. She knew you were the only one who would understand its true value, not just in a material sense, but in an emotional one. There's something inside that house, something you need to find. I looked at the key again, trying to process everything she had just told me. The house was mine. It didn't make sense. Why would Estelle leave everything to me? And what was I supposed to find there? I didn't know how to begin unraveling it all. You'll need to go there, Margaret said softly. It's important. The house will give you the final piece of the puzzle. The final piece. The phrase echoed in my mind, carrying with it a weight I couldn't yet understand. I felt a sudden urgency, a pull that was stronger than any doubt or fear I had. I couldn't let this opportunity slip away. I'll go, I said, standing up a little too quickly, my heart pounding. When? Margaret handed me a small folded piece of paper with the address. I'll take you there. Estelle's house has been kept intact, but it's been empty for a while now. It might take some time for you to process what you find, but I know you'll be able to handle it. I nodded, trying to steady my breathing. Okay, let's go. Margaret led the way to her car, and the short drive to Estelle's house felt like the longest I had ever experienced. The streets blurred by, the city fading into the background as we got farther away from everything familiar. The rain had stopped, but a heavy fog had begun to settle in, making the roads seem eerily quiet. I couldn't help but think about what I might find once we arrived. Estelle's house was just as I remembered from the few visits I had made there as a child. A small cottage surrounded by overgrown hedges, and a well-worn garden that had long since been left to nature. The house was tucked back from the road, hidden by trees and the mist that clung to everything like a veil. Margaret stopped the car in front of the house and turned to me. This is it. Are you ready? I nodded, my pulse quickening. Ready as I'll ever be. We walked up the narrow path to the front door. I stood there for a moment, taking it all in. This place, this house, had always been a part of my childhood memories, but I had never truly understood it until now. I didn't know what to expect, what I was about to uncover, or what I would find hidden inside. Margaret handed me the key. Go ahead, use the side entry lock sticks, just like Estelle wrote. I inserted the key into the side door lock and turned. The door creaked open, revealing a dark hallway that smelled of dust and old wood. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. The house was exactly how Estelle had left it, untouched, preserved in time. The furniture was covered in sheets. The bookshelves were filled with old, worn novels, and photographs lined the walls. Photographs of family, of moments I had never seen. My heart ached as I realized how little I had truly known about my grandmother. Margaret stepped inside with me, her footsteps echoing through the stillness. Go ahead, she urged. Look around. The answers are here. I walked deeper into the house, guided by an unseen pull until I reached the back room. It was a small study, cluttered with papers, old journals, and a heavy oak desk. On the desk, in the middle of it all, was a small wooden box. I had no idea what it was, but something about it felt important. I opened the box slowly, my hands trembling, and inside I found a collection of letters. They were tied together with a red ribbon, worn and frayed with age. I reached for the letters, my breath catching as I untied the ribbon. The first letter was addressed to me. My name was written in Estelle's neat handwriting, but the words inside, they weren't what I expected. My dear Lucy, if you are reading this, then I know you are ready to learn the truth. The truth about your mother, about our family, and about why things were never as they seemed. I froze, the letter in my hand shaking. This was it. The truth I had been searching for. The final piece. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the weight of it all settle on me. This was more than just a house. This was the key to understanding everything. I had finally found what I had been searching for. The air inside Estelle's house felt thicker now, heavy with the weight of the secrets I was uncovering. After reading that letter, Estelle's words, written just for me, it felt like a final, irrevocable step into a past I didn't even know existed. I wanted to keep reading, to tear through the letters one by one and uncover everything. But Margaret had said we needed to go back to the lawyer's office to finalize some of the legal details. I nodded, half listening, as we made our way back to the car. The drive felt surreal. My mind kept spinning with everything I'd just discovered. But I knew it wasn't over, not by a long shot. Estelle's will, the rest of her instructions, they were waiting for me and I had to face them head on. By the time we arrived at the law office, I felt like I was walking in a fog. The cold, sterile environment of the firm seemed at odds with the warmth I'd felt in Estelle's house. But I didn't have time to dwell on that now. I walked inside, straightening my shoulders, trying to calm my racing thoughts. The usual receptionist was at her desk, but she didn't look up as we entered. Margaret led me past her into the back office, where several people were already waiting. My father, Ray, was sitting near the desk, along with my stepmother, Carol. Beside them was Derek, my half-brother, looking uncomfortably out of place in a button-down shirt, his fingers tapping nervously on his phone. I stopped in the doorway, feeling a strange disconnect from all of them. Why were they here? This wasn't their business, not anymore, but there they were, Carol with her tight smile, Ray, his expression hard and unreadable, Derek trying to avoid eye contact with anyone. Margaret cleared her throat, breaking the silence. Ah, good. Everyone's here, she said, her tone clipped. Please take a seat, Lucy. I stepped inside, my eyes flicking to my father, who gave me a stiff nod as I sat down. Carol's gaze met mine briefly before darting away. The tension in the room was thick, and I knew this wasn't going to be easy. Margaret took her seat at the head of the table and opened a folder in front of her, the papers inside rustling as she arranged them. She seemed calm, professional, but I could feel the undercurrent of something else beneath her composed demeanor. I'm sure you all know why we're here today, Margaret began, looking at my family in turn before her eyes settled on me. The reading of Estelle Whitman's will, my heart skipped a beat. I didn't know what to expect, but I could feel the weight of it pressing down on me. The will wasn't just about her estate. It was about everything she had kept hidden, about the family I had thought I knew. I had already seen some of the truths, but I had a feeling there were more to come. Margaret cleared her throat again and began to read aloud, her voice steady but distant. I, Estelle Whitman, being of sound mind and body, hereby declare this my last will and testament. To my daughter Rebecca, may she rest in peace, I leave my most cherished belongings, the family home on Halford Street, which is to remain in the family. To my granddaughter, Lucy Whitman, I leave all that remains of my estate, including the house and its contents, as well as a journal I have kept for many years. I flinched at the mention of my mother's name, the words hanging in the air like a painful reminder of everything I had never known. Margaret paused, looking over her glasses at the room. As you can see, Estelle made it clear that Lucy was her sole beneficiary, her heir. I could feel the eyes on me, especially Carol's. The quiet fury in her gaze was palpable. She had always been in control, always made sure she was at the center of everything. But now, Estelle had given me everything. It was mine now, all of it. Estelle also left specific instructions regarding the family home, Margaret continued. She wished for it to remain untouched, to be preserved as a place of memory, a place for reflection. I glanced at my father. His face was unreadable, but I could see the shift in his posture. He wasn't just here for the reading of the will. He was here for something more. I wasn't sure if it was guilt or just a desperate desire for something he could no longer have. And, Margaret said, flipping to another page, there is one more item of note, a personal note to Lucy. She handed me a small envelope that had been tucked inside the will. It was a simple thing, just a plain white envelope with my name written in Estelle's neat, precise handwriting. My fingers trembled as I opened it, pulling out a short, handwritten note. My breath caught in my throat as I read the words, feeling my heart squeeze in my chest. Lucy, I know you may not fully understand why I did what I did, but I want you to know this. Your mother didn't abandon you. She was taken from you. And I did everything I could to keep her memory alive. Now I am giving you this final gift, this home, this truth, so you can make it your own. Don't let anyone tell you who you are. You've always known the truth deep down. I'm proud of you, Lucy. Always have been. Love, Estelle. The words hit me harder than I expected. I blinked, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to spill over. My grandmother had known. She had always known the truth, and now she had given it to me, along with everything else. It was all mine now. I looked up from the letter, my throat tight. My father, Ray, was staring at me with a strange expression. Regret, maybe? Or just the realization that he'd been cut out of this in a way he hadn't expected. Margaret looked around the room. Estelle left no room for dispute. Everything is legally binding, and there will be no division of assets. Lucy is to inherit everything. I saw Carol's jaw tighten, her eyes narrowing. She opened her mouth to speak, but Margaret raised a hand, cutting her off. I'll remind you all that Estelle's wishes were very clear. There will be no contesting this will. It's legally ironclad. Carol's face flushed with anger, but she said nothing. Derek shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly caught in the middle of something he didn't understand. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. It was done. Estelle had left me everything, and now I had to figure out what to do with it. But as I looked at my family, my father, my stepmother, Derek, something in me hardened. I wasn't going to let them walk all over me anymore. They had manipulated me for years, twisted the truth, and used me as a pawn in their little games. But no more. Margaret finished reading the will and closed the folder in front of her. That concludes the reading of Estelle's will. Lucy, you are now the sole heir to her estate. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me, but I must advise you to act quickly. The house is yours now, but the longer you wait to make decisions, the more difficult it will become to manage. I nodded, still feeling the weight of everything Estelle had left behind. I turned to my father, who still hadn't said a word. I don't need your help, I said quietly, my voice firm. I never have. Ray opened his mouth to respond, but he didn't. He just sat there, staring at me. I stood up, feeling a strange sense of peace wash over me. I had everything I needed. The house, the truth, the future. As I walked out of the office, my mind was already working, planning. There was so much to do, but I would do it on my terms. And no one, not Carol, not my father, not anyone, was going to take that from me. The truth was mine now. It was time to reclaim what was rightfully mine. The reading of Estelle's will had left me reeling, but now, as I walked out of the attorney's office and into the harsh light of the afternoon, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The weight of the truth and the house I had inherited was starting to sink in. But something else lingered in the back of my mind. My father, Ray, and my stepmother, Carol, were still sitting there in that sterile conference room, and I knew it wouldn't be long before they came for what they thought was theirs. It wasn't over, not yet. I headed straight for my car, ready to put distance between myself and everything I had just learned. The last thing I needed was to be caught up in some emotional fallout, especially when I still hadn't fully processed all of it. As I sat in the driver's seat, my phone buzzed, the vibration cutting through the silence. I hesitated for a moment, my fingers lingering over the screen. It was a message from Ray. Dad. Lucy? We need to talk. This isn't over. You need to come back and discuss this. It's not just about the money, it's about family. The words stung more than I expected. It wasn't about the money, he said, but it always had been, hadn't it? I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me again, that familiar bitterness rising. I didn't respond immediately, just stared at the message, trying to steady my breathing. Before I could think too much about it, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Carol. I sighed, bracing myself for whatever guilt trip she had prepared. Carol, I can't believe this, Lucy. You're taking everything, the house, the money. This was supposed to be our future. Don't let Estelle's will ruin everything. Please think about this. I'm just trying to help. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. Help? My mind flashed back to everything I'd seen in Estelle's journal, the years of manipulation, the quiet control Carol had exerted over my life. It had always been about keeping me in line, keeping me small, and now she was trying to convince me that she was doing this for my benefit. I started the car, the engine rumbling beneath me, and pulled away from the curb, determined to get some space before I allowed any more of their words to get to me. But I wasn't fooling myself. I knew they wouldn't give up that easily. They had always expected me to fall in line, to do what was expected. But now, everything had changed. I wasn't the same person I had been yesterday. Later that night, after hours of walking through my thoughts, I found myself standing outside Estelle's house again. The fog had settled over the neighborhood, giving everything a dreamy, almost eerie quality. The house loomed in front of me, its silhouette dark against the night sky. I hadn't planned to come here so soon, but something was pulling me back. The key in my pocket seemed heavier than ever. I wanted to explore, to search for the truth, but a part of me wasn't ready to face whatever Estelle had left behind. Still, I knew there was no turning back now. I walked up the familiar path, the key clutched tightly in my hand. The side door opened easily, just as it had that morning. I stepped inside and took a deep breath, the musty scent of old wood and forgotten memories wrapping around me like a blanket. The house felt even more ancient now, the silence almost oppressive. I walked through the hall, the creaking of the wooden floors echoing in the stillness. Estelle's belongings were just as they had been left, everything in place as if she had simply stepped out for a moment. There was a faint trace of her presence in every room. The soft, faded colors of her furniture, the neatly arranged bookshelves, the faint scent of lavender that lingered in the air. It was as if she had created this cocoon of peace, a world she had built for herself, but it had never been meant for me. I walked past the rooms, letting my fingers brush lightly against the walls. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but a part of me felt drawn to the study where I had found the box earlier that afternoon. The small room at the back of the house. It was quiet, isolated from the rest of the house, and somehow it felt like it held the answers I was searching for. I pushed open the door, stepping inside. The room was just as I remembered it, but this time it felt more intimate, more real. The box on the desk was still there, sitting exactly where I had left it. My heart beat faster as I walked over to it, the heavy feeling in my chest growing with each step. I lifted the lid again, pulling out the letters one by one. They were all addressed to me, all written by Estelle. I began to read the first letter. The words were familiar, comforting even, but there was something more, something deeper that I hadn't seen before. She spoke about my mother, about her life, and about everything that had happened. And then I saw it, hidden between the lines, like a secret waiting to be uncovered. Estelle had known about Carol long before I did. She had watched her manipulate my father, watched her tear our family apart from the inside. But she had never said a word. She had kept quiet, for my sake, for my protection. The truth hit me like a wave. Estelle hadn't just been my grandmother, she had been my protector. And now she was gone. The letters continued, each one more revealing than the last. They were filled with the hidden truths I had never been told, the ones I had always suspected but never dared to ask. Estelle had fought for me, but there had always been a price to pay. And now it was up to me to decide how to move forward. As I sat there, surrounded by her words, the weight of the decisions I had to make felt unbearable. Everything in this house was mine now. The inheritance, the responsibility, the truth. But it wasn't just about the house or the money. It was about my future, my identity, and finally reclaiming what was mine. I closed the letters, the weight of them settling in my chest. There was no going back. The truth was out, and now I had to decide how to use it. And for the first time in my life, I felt a sense of clarity. I knew what I had to do. The past was gone, but the future? It was mine to shape. The days that followed the reading of Estelle's will and the discoveries in her house felt like a blur. Everything had changed, but I wasn't sure how to adjust to the weight of it all. I had inherited the house, the truth about my mother, and a legacy I didn't fully understand yet. But the one thing I did know was that I couldn't let this moment, this revelation, define me forever. I moved into the house on Halford Street a week later. The place still smelled like Estelle, a strange blend of old books, dried lavender, and wood polish. It wasn't the most luxurious house, but it had character, years of memories tucked into every corner, every faded photograph on the walls, every piece of furniture that seemed untouched. It felt like stepping into a time capsule, one that belonged to someone who had lived carefully, intentionally, and now it was mine. It wasn't just a house. It was a home, and it was a link to a past I had never known, a past I was now determined to understand. But living here wasn't just about honoring Estelle's legacy. It was about reclaiming my own life. As I unpacked my things into the guest bedroom, what would be my bedroom for the foreseeable future, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was starting over. It was both liberating and terrifying. Everything I thought I knew about myself, about my family, had been turned upside down. Now I had to figure out who I was without their shadows looming over me. A few days into the move, I ventured back into the study, the room where I had found the letters Estelle had left for me. I needed space to think, to breathe. The house was too quiet, too full of things that had once belonged to someone else. The weight of Estelle's memory pressed down on me in every room, and I wasn't sure if that was something I should embrace or something I needed to escape. I sat down at the desk, running my fingers over the surface of the wood. Worn from years of use, there was still so much to process. The journal, the letters, the truth about my mother's death. It was a lot to carry, but there was one thing I hadn't done yet, something Estelle had wanted me to do. I had to confront the family, the people who had kept the lies alive, who had manipulated me for years. They thought they could control me. They thought they could use me, but they were wrong. I picked up my phone and dialed. I didn't know what I was going to say exactly, but I knew it was time to put an end to the old story. It was time to move forward, and that meant confronting the people who had never seen me for who I really was. When I arrived at my parents' house the next day, it felt strange. I hadn't seen Ray or Carol in days, and the tension between us was thick. The driveway was empty, and the front porch light flickered as I walked up to the door. The house felt hollow, like it didn't belong to anyone anymore. Ray answered the door. His face was tight, his eyes shadowed with something I couldn't quite place. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, blocking the entryway, like he was waiting for me to speak. "I'm not here to argue," I said, my voice steady but firm. "I came to talk." He stepped aside reluctantly, letting me into the house. Carol was sitting in the living room, arms crossed, her face as tight as ever. She didn't even look at me as I entered. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I wasn't the same person I was when I walked out of here last. I wasn't the same person I'd been just a few weeks ago. I know what you've been doing, I said, my voice calm but unyielding. I know how you've manipulated me, how you've twisted the truth, how you've used me for everything I could give, and I won't stand for it anymore. Ray shifted uncomfortably, but didn't speak. Carol finally looked at me, her expression unreadable. She didn't say anything, but her silence was enough. She knew what I was talking about. I'm not going to play along with this lie anymore, I continued. Estelle left me everything, the house, the estate, everything, and I'm not giving it back. Not to you, not to anyone. Carol opened her mouth to say something, but I held up my hand, cutting her off. You don't get to call the shots anymore. You don't get to control me. You don't get to take from me anymore. I've had enough. There was a long, tense pause. I could feel the anger radiating off Carol, but she didn't speak. Ray just stood there, his hands shoved into his pockets, his face tight. I'm not asking for your approval, I said, my voice growing more sure with each word. I'm not asking for anything from you, but I'm taking what's mine. And if you want to be a part of my life, if you want to be a part of this family, then you'll respect my choices. Carol finally spoke, her voice low and sharp. You don't understand, Lucy. We're your family. You can't just walk away from us. You can't just throw all of this away. You owe us. I stared at her, my jaw clenched. I don't owe you anything. I've been paying for your mistakes, your lies, your choices for far too long. I don't owe you a single thing. Ray stepped forward, his voice quieter, but with a sense of finality that made my heart race. You don't have to shut us out, Lucy. You don't have to do this alone. We're still your family. I shook my head. I don't need you. Not the way you've been, not the way you've treated me. You've made your choices, and now I'm making mine. I turned and walked toward the door, not looking back. As I stepped outside, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I was just done. I didn't need them. I had everything I needed now. The house, the truth, and the future that was waiting for me. It was time to let go. Back at Estelle's house, I stood in front of the large, dusty window that overlooked the garden. The fog had cleared, and the sun was setting, casting a warm, golden glow over the landscape. I was free. For the first time in my life, I felt like I could breathe. And as I stood there, staring out at the world that was now mine to shape, I realized something. The past had its place, but it didn't define me. I was no longer the person I had been. I was the person I chose to be. And the future, it was up to me. I turned away from the window, my heart steady and sure. There was so much more to do. But now I was ready. I was ready to move forward. And this time, it would be on my terms. The days after confronting my family were quieter than I expected. I had braced myself for more calls, for desperate pleas, or angry accusations. But they didn't come. At least not right away. For the first time in my life, I felt a strange peace. No guilt trips, no endless requests for money, no subtle manipulations. It was as if the universe had finally given me permission to breathe. I spent the next few days settling into my new routine. I was living in Estelle's house now, sorting through her belongings, piecing together the past she had left behind. Each day, I discovered more about her, about my mother, Rebecca, and about the way Estelle had fought to keep certain truths hidden from me. But it wasn't just about the past. I had my own life to live now, and I knew I couldn't keep looking backward. I started making plans, small steps at first, cleaning out the garage, organizing the garden that Estelle had loved so much, figuring out what I wanted to do with the house. There was so much potential in this place, but it would take time to make it my own. The house had always been a sanctuary for Estelle, but now it was mine. It was a blank canvas waiting for me to paint my own future. But the peace I had found was fleeting. A week later, I started receiving the first signs that my family wasn't ready to let me go. It began with a series of cards, Christmas cards, birthday cards, and then just random cards with no return address. At first, I thought it was just a way for them to reach out without confronting me directly. But the messages inside were different. From my mother, "Sweetheart, I know things have been hard lately, but family is family. We're not the same without you. Please, let's talk. We miss you." From Ray, "Lucy, your mom's really struggling. She's been sick with worry. We all miss you, but we understand why you did what you did. Just know that I'm still here. I'll always be here for you. And then there was the text from Anna. Anna, I can't believe you're doing this. It's just a house, Lucy. What about all the memories? Please don't shut us out. You know Mom and Dad aren't handling this well. You've changed everything. You've ruined everything. I read through them all, the words seeping under my skin. They were trying to guilt trip me, trying to reopen the door I had slammed shut weeks ago. They wanted things to go back to normal, to have me back in my old place as their safety net, as their easy target. But I had changed. I wasn't the same person anymore, and they were struggling to accept that. As the days went on, the messages grew more desperate. My phone would buzz with notifications, one after the other, all from my family. They weren't giving up. They wanted to re-enter my life, to convince me that I still owed them, that I wasn't finished with them yet. But I wasn't going to give in. Not again. I deleted the texts, threw away the cards, and tried my best to ignore the rising sense of guilt that crept up inside me. It was like I was waiting for something more, a confrontation, a breakthrough, a final apology from someone, but it never came. The silence was their form of punishment, and that was fine with me. A few more weeks passed, and life settled into its new rhythm. I had begun working at the local community clinic, a place where I felt like I was actually making a difference. I started looking into setting up a scholarship in my mother's name, a way to honor her memory and make sure she was remembered the right way. No more lies, no more half-truths. The truth was all I had left, and I intended to hold on to it. But then, one day, I received a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. My pulse quickened as I made my way to the door, trying to keep my expression neutral. When I opened it, I was face to face with Ray. His face was drawn, his clothes rumpled, like he hadn't slept in days. I stood there for a long moment, neither of us speaking, the silence between us stretched, as if both of us were waiting for the other to make the first move. Finally, Ray spoke, his voice soft but firm. Lucy, I need to talk to you. It's not what you think. I crossed my arms over my chest, feeling a knot form in my stomach. I don't know what you think this is, Dad, but I've made myself clear. I'm done with the games. I'm not playing anymore. He stepped forward, lowering his voice. It's not about the money, Lucy. It's never been about that. I raised an eyebrow. Isn't it, though? Because you've never asked for anything else from me. Not love, not time, not a relationship, just money. Ray flinched at my words, but his eyes remained steady. I know I've messed up, but I'm trying, Lucy. You have to understand what you did, what you took from us. It's not just about the house. It's about you, about what we've lost. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, but I want to fix this. I shook my head, anger bubbling up inside me. You don't get to fix it. You don't get to come here and tell me you want to fix it now. You never cared before. You were fine with the way things were as long as I was your backup, your emergency fund. I paused, struggling to keep my emotions in check. But now that I've finally stepped out of your shadow, now you want to make it all better. Ray opened his mouth to speak, but I held up my hand, cutting him off. Number Etsu. I've spent too many years cleaning up your messes, pretending everything was fine. It wasn't, Dad. And it's time you understood that. I stepped back, opening the door wider. I'm done with this. I'm done with you. I'm not going back to being your scapegoat. Ray looked at me for a long time, as if he was searching for some kind of answer in my eyes. But all I saw was defeat in his gaze. He knew, deep down, that I wasn't going to change my mind. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty for it. I'm sorry, Lucy, he said, his voice breaking. I didn't say anything in response. I just watched him stand there for a moment longer before he turned and walked away. His shoulders slumped, the weight of the years finally catching up with him. That night, I sat alone in Estelle's house, my eyes fixed on the fire crackling in the hearth. The room was bathed in warm light, the scent of wood and candles filling the air. I had my space now, my truth. And for the first time in my life, I felt peace. I didn't need to look back. I didn't need to reconcile with them. The people who had used me had already chosen their path, and I had chosen mine. The silence was heavy, but it was mine now. I had earned it, and I was finally free. It had been a few months since the confrontation with my father, Ray, and my stepmother, Carol. A few months since I had closed that door for good. Since then, things had been relatively quiet, and I found myself growing into this new chapter of my life in ways I hadn't anticipated. Living in Estelle's house had given me a sense of grounding, but it was also an overwhelming weight to carry. It wasn't just the physical space, it was the history, the legacy of a woman I thought I knew, and the truth she had kept hidden from me all these years. Slowly, I was learning to make this place my own. Not just by cleaning up, rearranging furniture, or gardening the way Estelle had, but by making decisions for myself. By carving out my future with my own hands. I had set up a scholarship fund in my mother's name, something that felt right. Every step of it was a tribute to her and the woman she was, someone who had been erased from my life, but never from my heart. I was working at the local clinic now, finding fulfillment in something that wasn't just about survival, but about contributing to the community I had grown up in. Slowly, I was building the kind of life I wanted. Not the life I was expected to lead, but the one I had always dreamed of when I was younger. Margaret had continued to guide me through the legal details of Estelle's estate, and each time I met with her, I felt a little more confident, a little more sure of the decisions I was making. Estelle's journals had provided a wealth of insight into my family's history, into my own past, but it was what I was building now that mattered more than anything. One crisp morning, I stood in front of the window of the living room, watching the sun rise over the garden. The dew was still fresh on the grass, and the flowers Estelle had carefully cultivated were now blooming in shades I hadn't noticed before. It was my garden now, my home. The thought still felt foreign, but it was starting to settle into me. And with every passing day, I felt the weight of it all lifting. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, pulling me from my thoughts. I reached over and saw the familiar name flashing on the screen. Margaret. I picked it up quickly, a little surprised that she was calling so early. Margaret? I asked, my voice still thick with sleep. Lucy, she said, her voice warm but serious. I've got something for you. It's the final piece of Estelle's estate. It's been a long road, but we're almost at the end. I wanted to make sure you were prepared. I sat up straight. What do you mean? What's left? There was a pause on the other end of the line before Margaret answered. There's one more thing Estelle wanted you to have. Something personal. I think it's time you see it. The knot in my stomach tightened. Something personal? My mind immediately raced to the journal entries, to the letters Estelle had written me, to the house and the pieces of her life I had already uncovered. But I couldn't imagine what else she might have left behind. I took a deep breath. Where is it? I'll bring it to you. Just be ready. It's something you'll need to see in person. A few hours later, I stood in the living room waiting for Margaret to arrive. The morning had turned into afternoon, and I found myself pacing, unsure of what to expect. When I heard the car pull into the driveway, my heart skipped a beat. Margaret stepped out of the car, carrying a small, old-fashioned box. It looked like something out of another era, the kind of box you'd find in an antique store or an estate sale. The wood was dark, polished with age, and the brass hinges gleamed in the sunlight. Lucy, Margaret said softly, holding it out to me. This was the last thing Estelle wanted you to have. I don't know what's inside, but she made sure it would be given to you when the time was right. I took the box from her hands, my fingers brushing the cool wood. The weight of it felt both heavy and delicate, like it held 1,000 secrets. Thank you, I said, looking up at her, unsure what to say. My emotions were all tangled up inside me, grief, anticipation, and a quiet sense of loss for the things I'd never get the chance to ask Estelle herself. I'm not sure I'm ready for this, Margaret nodded. You're stronger than you think, Lucy. I've seen that since the moment you walked through my door. Estelle believed in you, and she wanted you to have everything she could give. I opened the box slowly, the soft creak of the hinges filling the quiet room. Inside was a small bundle wrapped in a faded cloth, tied with a piece of twine. I untied it carefully, unwrapping the cloth to reveal an old tarnished locket. I recognized it immediately. It was my mother's. I had seen photos of her wearing it when I was a child, but I had never known where it had gone. I held the locket in my palm, feeling the cold metal against my skin, the weight of it in my hand. It's hers, isn't it? I whispered. Margaret nodded, her voice quiet. Estelle kept it for you. She wanted you to have it, to remember that you were loved, even if you didn't always know it. I closed my fingers around the locket, feeling the tears that threatened to rise in my throat. I had spent so many years wondering about my mother, about what had really happened to her, about why she had never been there. But holding this locket now, I felt something shift inside me. Estelle had loved me. My mother had loved me. It wasn't enough just to know it. Now I felt it. I looked up at Margaret, who stood there, her gaze soft. "Thank you," I said again, my voice trembling. "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," Margaret replied. "Estelle knew you'd find your way, and now you have. This is yours, Lucy. This is your legacy." I nodded, holding the locket tightly, feeling the weight of my grandmother's love, of my mother's memory, settle into my heart. This was where I came from. This was who I was. As I stood there, holding the locket in my hand, I realized that everything I had fought for, everything I had worked toward, had been leading me here, to this moment, to the truth, to the acceptance of who I was, who my family had been, and who I was going to be. And for the first time in my life, I felt at peace. Later that week, I graduated from nursing school. It wasn't the kind of ceremony I'd expected, with grand speeches or hundreds of people clapping. But it was everything I had worked for. Margaret was there, smiling proudly in the crowd, watching as I crossed the stage to receive my diploma. I stood there, feeling the weight of the moment. This was my life now, not a life shaped by family expectations, not a life defined by what others thought I should be, but a life that was entirely mine. I walked off the stage, my heart light for the first time in years. Margaret was waiting for me, a warm smile on her face. "You did it," she said. "I did," I said, my voice steady, "and I'm not looking back." The journey hadn't been easy, and there was still a long way to go, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what lay ahead. I was ready to embrace my future, to honor my past, and to build a life that was truly mine. Estelle had given me the foundation. My mother had given me the strength. And now, it was time to build something that would last. For the first time, I felt like I was truly home.